Good. So now we're on YouTube. I'm going to go, let's see, where are we here? I'm going to go make sure Annie is on. I don't see her on. I'm going to go give her a link. So hang up for a second, you guys. Technology does this sometimes, but we're trying to make it accessible to everybody. So let me just go get a and believe me, this is going to be big.
Divine intervention happened this morning.
This is going to be big. Okay, let me go send this to Annie.
You have all your matching things.
So I don't see her. I'll go to her Facebook. She's probably on my other Facebook. Let me just go grab her here. Messenger. Annie.
Like elbow
Didn't
grease,
send her the
that's
link.
right, there was
So
like
there
these
she's going to have the link
apples,
now. And we should all be up in a second. So there's that.
Yeah,
I'll be able to see when she gets on. So before she gets on, I wanted to give you a little backstory of Annie Dru. Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Zoom. So Ralph and Jen Havens here. And years ago, we had, I was still sick. I couldn't run, had terrible bone pain, terrible depression. My kidneys, liver, GI tract were acting funny. Nobody figured out. It was before I figured out it was fluoride in the water. And but Annie came to the house to do a 2-hour thing with us, and because we wanted to learn more about nutrition. She was somebody I knew for quite a while, and she came back into our world, and she was doing a thing about ancestral eating and really cool ways to heal. And so she hung out with us for 2 hours.
And I was pregnant with Ben, so
Oh, you were we were pregnant. And so, or you were pregnant. I was like hanging around. And so oh, there's Annie. Cool. So we'll be with her in just a second. I introduced Annie Dru, and Annie came and told us all this way to eat and be healthy, and to really live in the way that our ancestors lived for thousands and thousands of years. But the only thing we got out of it was to eat more ferment. We just forgot. She brought all the stuff, told us all the stuff, and we just got one thing. And then we took her class every week for I think 6 weeks. And
when Ben was about a year old, he took his first steps in Annie's house during that class.
That's right.
He was almost a year old.
And then she got us really dialed into this way of eating that we use now for ourselves and our clients. And so fast, I'll tell a teeny bit of her backstory, and then I'm going to have her tell the rest of it, because it's really amazing how God works and how the world works and how things conspire to help you. And so Annie was somebody that had found a way to recover from osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, all sorts of breakdowns in her physical body. And she used a way of eating, an ancestral way of eating. And that's what she taught us. And so she was going along with life is really good in San Diego. And then we kind of lost a bit of touch. We moved up to the Pacific Northwest and we'd see her, but you could tell she was going through a lot of hard times. And so this morning she messaged me after my Facebook Live, because some stuff came up this morning where it's like Jen and I decided we're going to go to Washington, D.C. for the big march on Washington. If you're not familiar with it, just go right now, open another browser and keep it open for later, the VIE event, THEVIE event.com. And you'll see where we're at and what we're doing. And you can look at my other Facebook Live about what that's all about, but we'll talk more about that. But Annie then messaged us and said, we got to talk. And so we just got on the phone or Zoom and then decided we're going to have her on our show right now. Because I asked God this morning for guidance, because it's freaking weird what's going on in the world. And so we're like, just show me the guidance so I can see it. Give me a sign. And Annie Dru showed up. So I'm going to introduce Annie Dru right now and ask her a little bit about her backstory that we found out a little bit more of this morning. And then let me see if it's Annie Dru right now. Oh, I hope this works. And ask her a little bit about her backstory. Man, this is weird. I think we're going to have a little problem here, because this is going to be on YouTube.
I wonder if you can turn the volume down.
I can turn this volume. Ah, there we go. All right. So So let's talk to Annie, and she's got a lot of cool stuff, and it put us at
so
ease.
much wisdom to share with us. Yeah.
Okay, allowed to talk. Yes, Annie is now allowed to talk.
Hi. Hi, guys.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Annie.
I am delighted to be here.
Do you want to have your video on?
Sure.
I think there's a little icon there that says allow video or start video or something.
Let's see.
I might have to promote you to panelist.
That might be on your end, Ralph, because
Okay, let me promote you to panelist. And let's see.
There we
you
go.
are. Okay.
Good job.
All right, Annie Dru.
Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it's so awesome. It's so good. Good to hear from you. So yeah, so can you just give us a little, because I want to give a little, so basically Annie is somebody that's very knows a lot of the people in the Weston A. Price Foundation, the Price Pottinger Nutrition Foundation. She, all that nutrition and physical degeneration book of Weston A. Price, she's very big in that world and helped us a lot and very connected to ancestral ways of eating. And if you're not familiar with that, you can learn more about that. But she has a lot of authority and has taught a lot of classes on how to be healthy using very ancient wisdom. And so a lot of authority coming from Annie and also from her personal story. So do you want to give us give everybody just a bit of like who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so that you said it very well, Ralph. I experienced in my mid 40s kind of a breakdown of my skeletal system. And I was dealing with just insane chronic pain in my body, which was really new for me. I'd never had any kind of, long, ongoing chronic pain situation. So I wasn't really prepared for it. And I felt in my early to mid 40s like I was in my 90s, and didn't have any way of really pinpointing the cause of it, other than that I had sustained an injury when I was a swim instructor. I had inadvisedly done a dive to demonstrate something for my students because they were egging me on, and I hyperextended my knee. And what should have been just like an injury that lasted a week or two ended up just becoming chronic, and it went from my knee to my hip to my back, and then it felt like just my entire skeletal system was in pain. And this went from 1 year to 2 years to 5. Before I knew it, I was just completely debilitated. And I thought I was a healthy person. I mean, I had always been interested in nutrition, and I'd always been interested in alternative health, acupuncture, homeopathy, all the different holistic modalities. So I couldn't figure out what in the world could I be missing from this picture. I was a whole food shopper. So it really came as quite a shock to me that I had room for kind of an overhaul of my dietary protocol. And the way it happened was kind of like you said about this morning, on one of the worst days of my experience with that chronic pain, I got myself down on my bad knee and literally just offered up a prayer. Like, I don't know where to turn next, and sometimes when you hit that rock bottom place, like that's what it takes to, create that epiphany for you. So the very next day after I offered up this prayer, Sally Fallon's Nourishing Traditions book crossed my path. And there was something about seeing that cover of that book that just hit me like, this is it. So, of course, I dove into that book, learned about Dr. Weston A. Price and his, seminal nutritional studies back in the 30s, and began a journey of just a really deep dive into the concept of ancestral cuisine. So I would say within about 8 to 9 months doing this protocol, I was completely free of my pain.
8 to 9
That's
months.
amazing.
Yeah. And as you may know, at the time that all this happened, I was a musician performing. I was working in the publishing field, so I was doing a lot of traveling, and I literally everything came to a screeching halt when I got sick. I couldn't travel anymore. I certainly couldn't stand on a stage for any length of time. It was just one of those things where I thought, well, this is it. This is the end of my career. And so when I got well, of course, my expectation was, oh, I'm going to go back to doing music. And, sometimes the best laid plans, I actually found myself being sought out by people in my circle who saw the transformation and wanted to know what I had done. And I think a lot of us get started in that way in terms of being health educators. It's like, you fix what's broken in you, and then people see that result and they want to know what you did. So that's how it started for me. And I was 10 years in San Diego County as an ancestral cuisine educator, traveling all over the county, just having the time of my life. You guys kind of came into my sphere right about the middle of that journey. And I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I became an advisory board member of the Price Pottinger Foundation. After several years in the local community, I was contacted by the Weston A. Price Foundation. Sally Fallon wrote me a letter and asked me to come and speak at the Wise Traditions Conference. I mean, everything was just going my way, in terms of my passion for ancestral cuisine and being able to disseminate the information. And that's kind of when the second time in my life, the floor fell out from under me. So it started, like I told you guys this morning, with what I thought would be a relatively minor head injury. It was just kind of like a freak accident involving a picnic table. I won't go any deeper than that. But I had a traumatic brain injury, a concussion, and I thought, okay, well, I'm a relatively healthy person. I'm going to bounce back from this. And I did fairly well. I got some osteopathic treatment, cranial sacral stuff. And after about 3 months, I'm like, okay, I'm back in my saddle. And then about a year and a half later, I had a second and even more intense head injury involving a sailboat. And, like I told you this morning, I've never had head injuries in my life. Like, this was new to me. So here are two in a matter of 2 years. And the second one really took the wind out of my sails, no pun intended. And so, of course, I'm employing all of my ancestral cuisine, knowledge, thinking that, that's, if anything's going to save me, it'll be that. And then, believe it or not, a third time, about another year and a half after the second injury, I was sitting at a stoplight and was rear-ended by a texting driver and suffered a whiplash. Mm. And that whiplash was the final straw for me. And I could no longer go into the field and do my cooking classes. And it was heartbreaking to me because it was my whole world. And so trying to make lemonade out of lemons, I thought, well, if I can't go out and do it, maybe I'll leverage the power of the internet and do these classes online. So that was my intention. And I began down that path and discovered that my wireless internet connection was not adequate to the task because I had students out of the country and so forth. And so my husband, came to the rescue. He's like, no problem. We're just going to install a Wi-Fi booster to give us more connectivity, and you should be fine. And in fact, good to his word, we had great connectivity after that. But what I didn't realize at the time is that little Wi-Fi booster was really nothing more than a miniature version of a cell tower. So I sat underneath this with my 3 traumatic brain injuries, underneath this Wi-Fi booster for about 8 months. And during that time, my health very rapidly, I began to circle the drain. And this is not a pleasant thing to discuss, but, after about, like I said, about 8 or 9 months of sitting under that Wi-Fi router, I was profoundly suicidal. Mm. And I did not know what was making me so sick. In fact, I kind of linked it to my menopause transition because
I remember the Facebook posts and stuff.
Yeah, and I thought that's what it was. And so I was asking around. I was like asking my mom and my aunties and, my sister, my cousins, my friends who had gone through this transition, is this normal? And I would tell them about my symptoms and they'd say, it can be uncomfortable, but that doesn't really sound like what we experienced, and that was my first clue that maybe it was more than that. And then I thought, well, it's the stress of various, life factors. I mean, I just kept trying to rationalize away these ever increasingly debilitating symptoms. And, I'll just outline a few of the types of symptoms I have so that people can recognize maybe in their own lives where this type of injury can lead in terms of the symptomology. So for me, I think I can say that it started with things like hypertension. All of a sudden, my normally really, really low blood pressure shot through the roof. And I'll never forget the day that I recognized what was happening. I got out of bed and I felt this very strange sensation in my body that I'd never felt before. All I can say is it felt like a tightness and like a tightness all through my body. And I said to my husband, I don't feel well. He said, well, what's the matter? I said, I don't know, but I feel kind of like my blood pressure is really high. Well, we didn't have a blood pressure cuff because that'd never been an issue in our home. So we literally drove over to CVS and I got into one of those cuffs and it was off the chart. So then I had my husband sit down and take his, and his was really low and normal. And I'm like, wait a minute, what in the world is going on? Why would my blood pressure be so insanely high? So that was one of the first things. And then I started developing really, really, really intense insomnia, where I would wake up over and over and over again during the night. And usually when I would wake up, I would have to urinate. So I found myself going to the bathroom as many as 6 or 8 times a night. And it wasn't just a few dribbles and then I'd go back to bed. It wasn't just the urge and then nothing really happened. I mean, I would pee a quart at a time. And it was just what is happening? What is happening to me? And then the symptoms started getting really scary when I developed sleep apnea. So I would wake up usually it would be preceded by a dream in which I was feeling suffocated or like I was, running out of air. And then all of a sudden it would get to a critical point and I would wake up and gasp, just have this horrible sensation of I'm suffocating. And I would come to in this state and be sort of out of it because, I'd been in a deep sleep and not really sure what had happened to me. And then I'd fall back asleep, Ralph, and it would happen again. Yeah. And sometimes it would happen over and over throughout the night. So as you can imagine, I would wake up in the morning just wrecked, absolutely wrecked. And by this point I had a blood pressure cuff and I would get up in the morning and take my blood pressure. And I knew that it needed to be low when you wake up. You're not supposed to wake up with high blood pressure. It can rise during the day when you're active and maybe you're getting a little stressed out about whatever, but if you wake up with your blood pressure high, that is not good. So here I was waking up with blood pressure, sometimes as much as 168 over 96,
I've been terrified or scared.
Really, really hot. And I could feel it. And it wasn't just the silent, talk about being a sort of a silent killer. For me, I could actually feel the sensation of my blood pressure being really high. And maybe that's just kind of an artifact of having had really low blood pressure all my life. So on and on the symptoms went, and they were very nocturnal. So I would wake up in the night when I wasn't having apnea or I wasn't having nocturia, which is that, need to go to the bathroom over and over. I would wake up just with insane hot flashes. And I could have as many as a dozen or more hot flashes in the night that would bring me to full wakefulness. So you can see how I kind of mistook some of this stuff for menopausal symptoms, right? After a number of months going through this and trying to get to the bottom of it, I went to go see one of my Weston A. Price colleagues and practitioner who was a nutritionist and kind of naturopathic healer in San Diego, who also happened to be the vice president of the Weston A. Price Foundation. So she was a friend of mine, and I just went to her and I said, I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm in serious trouble, Oh, and plus I had gained a lot of weight. I'd always been a relatively slender person, and then just overnight I put on 30 pounds.
That's just weird.
So she says, you know what? I know your diet is, stellar, so we won't even go down that path. So let's do a hormone panel. So she ordered this hormone panel called the Dutch test. And at that time, it was like the most extensive, very expensive test that would really bring back some meaningful results. So I waited and waited and waited to get that test back. And she didn't call, and I'm getting more and more nervous. So I pick up the phone and I call her and I say, hey, I'm just wondering about what happened with my test results. And she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry I haven't called you. I just now got the information I was waiting for from the company who makes the test, because Annie, I could not read your results. I'd never seen anything like it. So I had to call one of the physicians at the company to interpret your test results for me. I was like, okay, this is going the wrong way.
Yeah.
She apparently spoke with this physician and they said, we've never really encountered this before, but this particular patient has basically free cortisol running through her blood 24 hours a day and almost zero melatonin. So I'm sure some of your viewers are familiar with the melatonin cortisol kind of dance, right? So when cortisol's high, melatonin's low. When melatonin's high, cortisol's low. They work in tandem. So if you have high cortisol all the time, including during your sleeping hours, that means that your melatonin is not, it's not activated. So that was the first clue. Like, ooh, okay, this is bad. Why is this bad? Because, and even I knew this at the time, melatonin is so much more than just a sleep hormone, right, Ralph? It's like, it's the hormone that signals those two cell regeneration programs in our mitochondria known as apoptosis and autophagy. So apoptosis is that programmed cell suicide. It's kind of like housekeeping for our cells, right? So when cells get too worn out and they're not useful to the body anymore, there's a system that allows them to kind of like self-destruct. And that's important. It's really important that your cells can do that. And then the other program is autophagy, and that's kind of like cell recycling. So there's still some usable bits and bobs, and we're just going to recycle them and use them to make new cells. So when melatonin is low, when it's supposed to be high, which is during the deep sleep hours, those two programs cannot be initiated. So you can imagine what the long-term consequences of that are, right? Like when you can't activate your cell regeneration programs, it's every single degenerative disease known to man can befall you, And in my particular case, having had these brain injuries and spinal cord injuries, that part of my body was the part that really needed that regeneration, really needed that that deep healing and restoration that happened during the sleep hours. So this explained a lot about what was going on for me at night, right? So I'm supposed to be in that deep sleep, taking care of all of this housekeeping. And in fact, I'm not getting to that place. So the gal that I went to see, my practitioner, said, honestly, I don't even know where to go from here. Like, this is such a radical situation. We tried some therapeutics, nothing came of that. Tried all kinds of different modalities were employed to no avail. So to make a long story short, I just continued to sort of devolve. And I remember getting up one morning, I'll back this up. So when I said that I got to the point where I was suicidal, I want your viewers to understand that the way that this mechanism works, we're going to talk about, which is the whole non-native EMF right? Okay, so I'm sure your viewers are familiar with it.
You guys know Annie's going to go very deep and beyond. There's a lot of hope here coming your way very soon.
I'll just get this story out of the way because this is where the hope comes in. So when you are being exposed in a vulnerable state, and I was in a vulnerable state, having had these head injuries, when you are exposed to this non-native electromagnetic, influence, you can literally change your biochemistry to the point where you are no longer synthesizing the neurotransmitters that make life worth living. And that's the point to which I descended, was where I was sleepless and completely lacking in those feel good chemicals, right? That we endogenously create in our own bodies when everything's working right. So I got to the point where I'm like, this is no longer a place that I want to be. And I would, sit up in the middle of the night and say to my husband, just out of the blue, I need to go. I'm done here. This isn't working. I'm exiting stage left. And of course he'd say, honey, how can you say that? What's going, So it was very upsetting to him, very distressing to him. So one morning I got out of bed and I went into his office, kind of like drugged myself, always very groggy, and sat down in his office. And he looked at me and he said, wow, you're just really suffering. You're really feeling bad. And I said, I really am. And he said, can you try again? Just try to tell me what it feels like to you. Does it feel like a flu, or like, what does it feel like, honey? And I looked at him and I said, it feels like I'm being poisoned. And in his frustration, he's like, poison? What could possibly be poisoning you? This house, we've gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, everything's organic and non-toxic, and right. Of course, we had Ralph, all of our cleaning supplies, all of our food, everything was so pristine. And so he shouted at me in his frustration, what's poisoning you? And it was something about the way that he shouted at me that like snapped me awake for a moment. And my mind opened up. And in my mind's eye, I saw the Wi-Fi booster above my desk and I screamed, it's the router!
Wow, so cool you got that and you recognized it. So many people would just discount that.
So of course he immediately ran over, pulled it out of the wall. And that was the beginning of me coming back online. And it was a very, very long journey because there's so much here that needs to be explored, because this technology is now ubiquitous in just about every home, not just in our country, but throughout the world.
We went wireless for this meeting because there's somebody downstairs installing a thing in our propane or working down there. So we thought, well, we won't make him listen to the show. So so we're all wireless now, but we're usually not. So yeah. So you found the EMF thing and yeah, obviously let you keep on going. And then what happened?
So we very slowly began to awaken to this invisible, tasteless, scentless, right, toxin that we were flooding our home with. And I've heard people describe it kind of like this: like if you want to light your stove or your furnace, you don't just fill your entire living space with natural gas.
Yeah.
You pipe it in directly to the appliance, right?
That's how we run our house right now.
So when we fill our homes with wireless radiation so that we can use the internet on our devices, it's kind of analogous to filling your home with natural gas so that you can use your stove, so you can light your stove. And it's ludicrous when you think about it like that, right? Why in God's name would we fill our homes with a potentially deadly toxin just so we could, light our stove burner?
Yeah, we got things to do on Twitter and Instagram.
And in fact, we do. And I'm not a Luddite, and I'm sure you're not either, because we're right here on this platform. But this, is kind of like the equivalent of piping your natural gas in.
That's how we usually live, yeah.
And so that was one of the very first things we did. First, we just started turning off the router at night. Just flipping, like put it on a wall switch and flipped it off. That helped a little bit, but it didn't get me over the hump. So then we learned more about Ethernet, which of course is so ironically, something that we all used just a decade ago, because we did not have, right? Most of us did not have Wi-Fi yet. We were all using Ethernet cables, but it's almost like the collective consciousness mind just completely forgot that that's how we used the internet before. Because if you talk to people now and say, this is what I'm doing, they're like, well, how do you get on the internet if you don't have Wi-Fi?
Yeah. And these aren't young people that say that. These people have lived through those times.
These are people who have lived through it. So, and of course, this is what the industry wants, right? Is for us to all have collective amnesia about the fact that there's another way to do this. So we did that. Then we hired a building biologist to come to the house, and he went over to the property with a fine-tooth comb and found every problematic area. Neighbors' Wi-Fi, smart meters, dirty electricity in our house, just everything that needed to be addressed. And so that was quite an undertaking and an endeavor. And in the middle of all this, here's the real irony. And I want to say that I'm telling the story with the utmost respect, but this is the truth. And when I was gathering all this information and recognizing what it was that was making me ill, I went to visit my practitioner friend who tried to help me in the beginning. And I told her, I said, "You're never going to believe what it was that was making me sick." And she's like, "What?" And I told her, and she went, "Of course. Why didn't I ask you about that? It wasn't even on my radar." Yeah. So I told her everything about what happened. And she said, I really need to look into this for myself and my other clients, because this is an area that I haven't delved into. It was very shortly after that, Ralph, that I got the news that this beautiful healer in our community had been diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor.
She got the message right then, but not in time, huh? Not in time.
So she had a grueling battle, multiple surgeries, and ultimately succumbed to her cancer on Christmas Day of last year.
Did she move away from her home? You told us earlier this morning that you found her
so
Energy Tower.
I don't think that I don't want to speak for her. She's not here, obviously, but I don't think that she fully grasped the connection at that point.
That's the part that interests me a lot, is that these messages that you get from God or the universe or your intuition, it's like you gave her this thing that was like, if she would have dove deep into that world with the stuff you know now, which we'll get into in a little bit, but she didn't fully grasp it, huh?
So once again, Ralph, kind of like with the ancestral cuisine thing, whereas I would have been more than happy to just learn my lessons, heal, and get back to doing what I was doing, her death and the loss that I sustained personally really prompted me to take on this new path.
And that's interesting, because we saw you through your Facebook post, how hard you were having, and it looked like you were checking out of any kind of like working to help people in any of this kind of stuff. So that's really cool.
Well, what I learned on my journey is, and I credit this with my mentor, Dr. Jack Cruz, one of his little truisms is, if you're not good enough for yourself, who the hell are you good enough for? So I really did need to pull back in and reevaluate everything in my life and make some really huge changes. And one of the biggest changes that I made was a completely relocation, across the country. I went 3,000 miles from the West Coast to the East, based on some information that I garnered by working with this really brilliant neurosurgeon, who was the first one to identify really how to go about restoring myself from this really gross injury. So I think probably the thing that your viewers need to know is the type of sleep apnea that I was suffering from, and the sleep apnea being, I think, the pivotal thing, like that was the thing that was probably the most impactful. And the thing is I had a type of sleep apnea that was not what most people think of. When they think of sleep apnea, they think of obstructive sleep apnea, kind of where the palate collapses and they snore or whatever, and then they, gasp for breath, but then they're fine. And this can happen many, many times in a night. And a lot of times it goes undiagnosed. And it can be, definitely have consequences for people's lives, but it's typically not immediately life-threatening. Whereas the type that I had was central sleep apnea. And central sleep apnea happens because of a brainstem injury. So because of my 3 TBI, whiplash, proximity to that Wi-Fi router, I actually damaged my brainstem. So whereas most practitioners would be like, well, we got to get you on a CPAP machine ASAP with the CPAP, because you're not breathing at night, and you need to breathe while you're sleeping. My neurologist said to me, that is exactly what we do not want to do. And the reason is because when you have sleep apnea, it's a compensatory mechanism, because your mitochondrial colonies are so compromised and they're failing so quickly that your body knows that excess oxygen is actually going to speed up their collapse. The collapse.
Doing something really wise to protect you.
So he said the last thing you'd want to do is override that mechanism. See, this is what I'm finding about the body that is so, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just
Miraculous.
mind-bending to me to recognize that the way the medical model has framed symptomology is exactly the opposite of the way Mother Nature.
I know, that's what I thought this show was going to be about, was what we found as well is that the body is doing the best it can do. No matter what is going on, the question is it's trying to protect you.
It is so wise.
Yeah, if you can find that and clear that, then you can heal, because the body's doing really smart things.
From very deep wisdom, yeah.
So what he taught me is the last thing we want to do is uncouple that system. So in the same way that, the allopathic model wants to override symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs or interventions, and even the functional medicine model wants to apply various types of therapeutic modalities, the body knows better. So he's like, we're going to get to the root of the issue, which is that your brainstem needs to heal. Well, what's going to heal your brainstem from an injury caused by non-native electromagnetic frequencies? Well, the obvious is native electromagnetic frequencies, right? So he said, it's not enough to just get rid of all the non-native input, and that include not only wireless technologies and cell phone technologies and all that stuff, but also the non-native blue light that comes through all of our screens and our devices. So all of that stuff is causing your brainstem injury. So we have to get you away from all that, get you back into Mother Nature's wheelhouse with her electromagnetic spectrum, and that's how we'll recover you from sleep apnea. And he said, but it's not going to happen where you are, because where you are.
How did you pick St. Augustine? Is that why you picked St. Augustine?
So I picked St. Augustine for a whole host of reasons, but basically the paradigm that he laid out for me was, you need to be at a lower latitude in a smaller population density city, because the higher the population density where you are, the more, as he says, obedient idiots, right, we're using all of these non-native devices, and so the more of this non-native EMF and artificial light frequency you're going to be exposed to. So I was living in a city of 3 million people that had recently become a 5G city. At the 33rd latitude, he goes, you need to get inside the 20s, be in a low population city without 5G. So that's, other things, how I ended up here in Florida. So to make a long story short, if I can, I've already made it long, but
it's good. It's good for people.
Literally, it took about 24 hours of being out of San Diego, and my sleep apnea began to reverse.
24
Wow.
hours. It's amazing how fast the body, when it knows it's got the right information, can run with it.
When I got to St. Augustine, my husband and I began an entirely new daily protocol. So we get up at about 5 a.m. every morning, meditate in the dark, and then we make our way to the beach where we watch the sunrise. And I mean 7 days a week. And we stay on the beach with our feet in the water for 2 to 3 hours. Wow. 7 days a week, wearing tan through swimwear, so that I can get all of those light frequencies into my body while my feet are grounded to the earth. And then I can recharge those mitochondrial batteries that began to brown out while I was in San Diego. So I couldn't heal my brainstem while my battery charge was low.
Yeah.
And the longer I stayed in that 5G city with 3 million people, in the 33rd latitude, the longer it was going to take. And it might have taken too long, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You motivated me as I heard this a bit this morning that I'm going to restart my running in the morning because I get up before the sun comes up, but I'm usually doing all my videos in a little room, and I live right next to a forest. So you kind of put a little spark in me.
Yeah, because of course that's another thing I was doing misguidedly, is I would wake up in the morning like many of us do, and the first thing I would grab in the dark, right, is my cell phone, and I'd start checking stuff.
Yep.
And there's that light, that blue light coming off that phone, not to mention the wireless, aspect of it. But what I learned from my neurologist is when the sun rises in the morning, it's the only time of the day when you have perfectly balanced infrared and blue light and no UV light.
Oh,
That sunrise allows for an incredible healing potentiality. And it literally signals our brain, the organs in our brain, to start the production of those endogenous neurotransmitters, those feel-good hormones that make life what it should be. So things like beta endorphin, dopamine, the melatonin is synthesized at the sunrise. Many people think of melatonin as the hormone of darkness, and it is, but it's actually synthesized in response to that sunrise. So if you're having trouble sleeping or having any disordered sleep of any kind, the first thing you want to do is get your eyes and your skin out there in those early sunrise hours to signal your brain to make that melatonin. And then when the sun sets, about 3 hours afterward, that's when your body releases that melatonin. But it can't release what it didn't make in the morning.
cool. So I want to give people ways to get more of all your healing ways, because and so we'll connect up with how they can connect up with you too and learn more. But this is a lot to digest in one bit. So, but it's really good. When you messaged me this morning, I was doing that thing because I got a message from God today to for us to go to Washington D.C. for the vaccine injury education thing. That's going to be this giant march all over the Washington Mall. It's going to be giant. And I was talking about some of the stuff that's happening and how pharmaceutical companies are taking over control of people's bodies and mandating vaccines and making it laws. And it's getting very, very, very at a critical point in time. And so we thought, well, we got to go after this. And you said something this morning that gave us a lot of hope. And you have a bigger picture, so we can
Beautiful
always
way to frame it.
yeah, we can talk about I want to have people, maybe we'll have you on more and more if you want, and connect up with how people can reach you and interact with you and your work for more of how to heal this stuff. I think that's really important, and you're giving people very good points to start. And there's a lot more, but little bits by little bits, right? And because you gave us all this information the very first time you saw us, and we only got this much, and then we had to take a class. So this is a really good amount. But I want to jump ahead a bit, so we'll come back and people can interact with Annie in all sorts of ways and get the rest of her cool stuff. But we thought, you know what, the world's getting really weird, and there's a big fight for people's bodies, and the way the pharmaceutical industry is using the mandates and the law to start to make it where they're forcing people to basically get injections of vaccines. And you had a point this morning of your bigger picture of what you see, and it gave me a lot of hope, and to know that, okay, all is well. Can you talk a little bit about your big picture of this whole thing? Like the 5G seems like daunting. Like, how are we going to do anything about that? And then the pharmaceutical industry with the vaccines, and there seems to be so many evil forces trying to kill you. So can you talk a little bit about the other side of all this stuff?
I'd be happy to, Ralph. And I think you just set it up beautifully, because the way it connects back to my story about the sunrise is that there is a neurotransmitter that we make endogenously in our own compound pharmacy up here called dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of connections. And when you have low dopamine, you have difficulty connecting the dots. You have difficulty seeing the forest for the trees. It is the hormone that allows us to identify trends in our environment. So I think those of us that are, sort of fancy ourselves somewhat awake, we look around sometimes at the people around us and think they're asleep. They're asleep. And the fact of the matter is that the lower your dopamine level is, the more asleep you are. The higher your dopamine level is, the more conscious you are. So this is Mother Nature's plan. This is why when you look at, we talked about the Sphinx this morning, when you look at, images of the Sphinx, what is the Sphinx doing? It's facing east towards the sunrise with all four extremities planted on Mother Earth. In this way, we raise our dopamine level to the point where we can not only identify these trends, like for instance, let me give you an example of a trend that people have trouble identifying. We have an autism rate of somewhere around 1 in 33 to 1 in 35 kids in Southern California, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sanity would dictate that this would be the top priority of our government, right? Because we are in essence creating a generation of living zombies. And I say that, I do not say that disrespectfully. Between my brother and I, we have 3 of our 6 children on the autism spectrum. But we are consigning people to less than the full, potential of their life by creating an environment that leads to autism. So if you look around you and you see people that seem to be carrying on about their business in the midst of this epidemic and wonder, how can they even, tolerate this? How is our society ignoring this insane epidemic? Well, that's how. Because of low dopamine. Because you literally cannot see what's right in front of your eyes. Think back in history, like before any of the technologies we have today or any of the ability to, alter our ability to observe. Our ancestors had to have high dopamine because it was a survival thing. Well, it's no different today. If one of our ancestors, ate a mushroom and they croaked, if the rest of the community didn't identify, oh, so-and-so ate that mushroom and then so-and-so also ate that mushroom and they both keeled over, right? If you couldn't identify that trend, you're toast.
Yeah.
That's what's happening today, Ralph.
Yeah.
People can't see what's right before their face. And it's that low dopamine that's creating that scenario. So the antidote to that is to replace the thing that's causing the low dopamine with something that will raise the dopamine level. What's causing the low dopamine? Artificial light and non-native EMF signals. Why? Because we are electromagnetic beings and our entire biochemistry is signaled by electromagnetic frequencies. And we were designed that way.
Are other things lowering dopamine too, like the vaccines or the glyphosate, or does that affect it?
So I won't get too deep into the woods with the other causal.
That's true. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so forth. But what I can tell you is that the neurotransmitter that allows us to see what's going on is profoundly low in the general population. When we look at this artificial, okay, so for instance, at sunrise, the Kelvin or the color temperature is about 1600, okay? But our cell phone is more like, I think, 8500 Kelvin, okay? So if you look at your cell phone before you see the sunrise, you're basically telling your brain it's noon at the equator.
Ah.
So if your brain chemicals are signaled by that gradual light, the incident light that comes from the sunrise to produce things like dopamine, the first light you see is solar noon at the equator, your brain's like, well, I guess we missed that opportunity for today.
Yeah.
So in this way, over time, you're creating a constant low dopamine state. So all of these tech addicts of this generation, right, that are literally glued to their screens are pretty much, profoundly limiting their ability to synthesize a hormone that will allow them to see what's going on.
Isn't that wild?
And this is by design. This is not coincidental. All right. So the tech industry knows that this is what's happening and is actually creating technologies to intensify, you know, the diminishment of awareness. It's by design, and it's not a new concept. This has been rolled out very systematically, very planned. None of this is accidental. And in this way, when you lower the dopamine level of an entire population, Ralph, you can do things like vaccinate them. You can do things like block the sun.
Yeah. Is that the craziest?
You can do things, right? Like, I mean, you have a lot of agency over a population when you lower their ability to identify reality. That's right before their face, right?
Yeah. And you had a really interesting perspective about that was like mind blowing and cool, and went straight to since the beginning of time stuff.
Beginning of time. None of this is new. None of this, you know, we talked about this morning, like, you know, the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. This is been the way it's been since the beginning of time. So we get our knickers in a twist thinking, oh my God, what's happening? You know, the world's gone mad. No, the world has always been mad. There has always been this interplay. You know, you call it what you want, yin, yang, good, evil, however you want to frame it. It's always been in existence. So this is just our little snapshot of what that looks like. So for our parents, it looked like Hitler and Nazi Germany, or, you know what I'm saying? Like there's every
Civil War, and yeah,
has had to deal with this dichotomy between good and evil. And so, like we talked about this morning, we can freeze, become deer in the headlights, panicked, you know, and paralyzed, or we can recognize that this is not only our challenge, but it is our opportunity to expand our awareness and to choose love over fear. Because of course, as we probably both agree, you know, those ultimately are, we call it good or evil, we call it whatever, but it's really love and fear. And when we capitulate to fear, we really rob ourselves of the opportunity to expand in love, which is, I believe, why we are on this planet in the first place. So I look at it less like, oh my God, they're out to get us, as, this is all very interesting.
And how do you get to play? How do you get to play in it, huh?
How do I want to show up in this opportunity?
Right. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that movies like The Matrix or The Hunger Games, or these are wildly popular, right?
There's some truth in it
for us to examine, because that's really what's going on.
Yeah. So where are you in your 0 to infinity stage of like hope?
Well, I can tell you this. I am in the process. I saw my first sunrise, my first conscious sunrise on September 2nd of last year. It happened to be my birthday.
Wow.
I saw my very first sunrise and began the process of opening my third eye. And this just last month, I had, you know, my 1-year anniversary of watching sunrises. And I can tell you that my level of hope from September 2nd, 2018 to September 2nd, 2019 is exponential. I mean, it every single time I see the sunrise and raise my dopamine level a little bit more, I have more hope.
That is awesome. And that's for free, man. You just got to get up.
That's for free. Get up, and you got to get skin in the game. See, this is what my neurologist taught me. Dr. Jack Kruse, for those of you who are listening, you're interested to know.
Last name, C or K?
Kruse.
Kruse.
And he's strong medicine, like not for the faint of heart. I was ready for it because I was, you know, at my extremity.
Is he just in a city, or is he online?
He's online. He has a website, jackkruse.com. He has blogs. He has a membership you can join so that you can learn more and do even a deeper dive into. He does not dumb anything down for anyone. He refuses.
jackcruise.com.
And he went to medical school twice. He first became a dental surgeon and then became a neurosurgeon. And he said, in neither of my medical school trainings did I learn about biophysics. I learned about biochemistry. But I had to go back and relearn everything based on the realization that we are electromagnetic beings and that our biochemistry is signaled by electromagnetic frequencies. So when you learn more and more about the biophysics, and I am just scratching the surface right now because I do not have a science background whatsoever. As I told you, I was a musician, I have an arts background.
You went from a couple of different versions of mess to bless, you know, and then you can show people the way. So that's more important than just a lot of education, you know.
And you truly have a gift, Annie. I so appreciate this about you, that you can take devastation and hardship in your own life and turn it into this really beautiful, deep inner learning and wisdom. And then not only that, but you transform that into such an incredible resource for other people. You really have a way of bringing that gift to the world. And I thank you for daring to do that. It's not an easy life, but hopefully you are rewarded on all kinds of levels, because it is such a gift to those around you and to the world. So I appreciate that about you.
Yeah. So how can, what are you up to these days? I haven't even asked you. So I don't even know if there's like a pivot to like, and then here's what you do. But is there any, what are you?
You can find me 7 days a week on the sand, you know, for the first, I give myself the best of every day. I don't give that away. I keep that.
So I'm going to start to do it. That's going to be my call to action, is to get out in the sunrise and go out in the forest instead of like just getting straight.
Like Dr. Cruz says, if you're not good enough for yourself, who are you good enough for? So that's my way of making myself good enough for me so that I can be good enough for others. And I really, if you walk away with one thing from this chat today, that's it. Get that sunrise by hook or by crook. If you do, you begin the process of recoupling yourself to Mother Nature instead of to man-made technology.
And then your dopamine can go up and you can start to see what you're here to do, you know, where your gifts go.
You never know until you are, again, reunited with Source. And for me, being reunited with Source means that I sleep deeply and restoratively and blissfully. I wake up refreshed. I have a clear head throughout the day. All my body parts function as they're meant to, right? Like when you're in that state of homeostasis, you know, the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
The imagination is the limit. I happen to be a person who's insanely curious. Like I have ridiculous level of curiosity. So when these, you know, obstacles come before me, you know, my first response, you know, after, you know, panic and terror, like is human, my first response is, what's going on here?
Yeah. That's so key, isn't it?
It really is. It's super important to not allow the fear to get a stranglehold on you, but rather to experience everything that's coming at you like a child, like, whoa, that's crazy. You know, like, and because when you're curious, the higher and higher you raise your dopamine, that curiosity will lead you where you need to go.
Yeah. And asking for guidance, I found, like, just straight ahead praying, man.
And then listening. Yeah, learning how to listen.
Yeah, like you listened and you saw the Wi-Fi thing and you didn't go, oh, that's weird. You actually paid attention. And your friend got some information, and I don't know if it would have been in time, but it doesn't sound like she might have heard it quite the same way. And maybe her path was different in the way she was going to.
You know, like, in all fairness, her case was unique because as I told you this morning, when I took a drive by her office after she passed, I saw a 5G cell tower on the corner in front of her building. And I think that there are, certain influences that can override a person's readiness.
Mhm.
Mother Nature is ruthless. She's benevolent, infinitely benevolent. But if you don't get the message, or you don't get the message in time for whatever reason, she's going to take you out.
So so connecting to source, praying and listening and being open to the answer, and being very curious and going with what your gut, your intuition, what happens when you get that message. Like what you get down.
Your intuition is highly connected to your dopamine level. That's really important. All these neurotransmitters that our brain synthesizes in response to the solar signal awaken us to be able to ask the right questions. It's not so much having the answer. We learned this with studying Dr. Price. What made him a genius wasn't that he had the answers, but that he asked the right questions.
Right.
Yeah, like why is this happening? Why is this
happening? Why is this happening? And and just being ready and willing to follow the breadcrumbs.
Follow the truth wherever it takes you.
And this is constantly evolving. Truth is constantly evolving as more and more consciousness is gained. So like in the case of Dr. Price, we were ready to kind of end the story with the food story, right? Yeah. But like Dr. Cruz said, being a dentist, he spoke to a Weston A. Price group multiple times and said, listen, if Weston A. Price were alive today, he would be in my tribe, not yours, because this isn't a food story. This is a light story. And the food story is a subset of the light story.
Someone told us that years ago. You
and Dr.
a wonderful thing, and Dr. Beryl from San Diego, who's also in the Weston A. Price world, how it's like information, and it comes in and the crystals of the earth, and then it turns into this information thing in the plants, and then we eat it, and we're getting information and energy and source stuff. So
the way I've heard Dr. Cruz describe it is that food is about 1/3 of the picture, light is 2/3 of the picture.
That makes sense, because I run into some people that have done everything right and they're failing miserably, and it's like there's no inner spark, and so the dopamine connection is really and connecting to source in a very physical way, like with the sun and with the earth. It's like there's a missing thing.
We're circadian creatures, and Edison and Tesla, that whole revolution of light and electrifying the grid and all that taught us that we are somehow immune from the effects of uncoupling from our circadian biology. And nothing could be further from the truth. And this is why we have these insane rates of bipolar disorder, suicide in our youth,
opioids,
opioid crisis, right? Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, all these neurodegenerative diseases. We cannot uncouple ourselves from our circadian dictates.
You can't do enough therapy or take enough natural supplements or eat the right food enough if you're not going to.
If you get the light part right, none of the rest of that matters. And if you don't get the light part right, none of the rest of that matters.
This is awesome, Annie. So I'm going to definitely ask you to be on more and more as you want. And if there is any way you want people to reach out to you or connect, you can tell me now, or you can tell me later and I can tell people, but are you open to people interacting with you? Do you do?
Yeah, more and more all the time, Ralph. Like just before I left San Diego last spring, I did what I called a Mito Reboot series. And it was a 6-week series, kind of very similar to our ancestral cuisine format, but instead of talking about food, we talked about light. So there were 6 classes that delved into all the elements that play into our circadian recoupling. And I had about 12 students in that online class, and it went really, really well. And then the time came for me to relocate. So I just, put that on pause, got myself here to Florida. And these last 3 months, I've literally just been making myself the best that I can be.
Well, then here's my thing. We'll talk more offline as we go through if you want, because I think I have the mechanisms to bring that to the world in a really big way nowadays.
I think you're getting close to offering a class soon again.
Yeah, my plan is to start another series the last week in October. Tuesday, whatever that last Tuesday is in October, and then run that for 6 weeks online. So if anybody's interested in learning more about circadian biology and non-native EMF and all the stuff that goes into the light story, I'd be delighted to have them as part of that group. So it's going to meet Tuesdays, I think, from 10 a.m. Pacific time to noon, and then here, is that right? Yeah, I'll have to look to make sure. But
yeah, so I'll spread the word, and we'll put it in the links of the YouTube and the Facebook Live as we get all that.
We'll do it just like this, just Zoom. You know, just everybody's in their little Brady Bunch box, and
we'll do that, and then we'll talk more and more, and I'll I'd love to be part of helping you spread the word and getting this out there. So I'm glad you're doing stuff online now, and that's going to be awesome. And if you guys want to message me on Facebook or on YouTube or on our email, let me know, and I'll connect you up with Annie and Dr. Cruz even more. And I'm going to reach out to him as well. And this is awesome, really awesome. And if you want, every Wednesday, Jen and I are doing our show now, Miracles, Magic, and Coffee, because I love coffee. I hope coffee is part of the way of happiness. It is for me. But Miracles, Magic, and Coffee. So it's ralphhavens.com/miracles, magic, I think in the symbol sign coffee. But you can find it all over my Facebook or YouTube links. And Annie, it's been so cool. It's like a gift. So cool. So cool to hear what you're doing.
Jen, seeing your beautiful babies, and it's just wonderful, Ralph. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Incredibly, incredibly, incredibly cool. Incredibly cool. Incredibly cool. I posted the thing that said, this is going to be the one thing you need more than anything else. And I thought it was going to be just the whole idea of like, the body's doing the best it can do and you got to find what it's protecting. And then this morning I woke up and got this download that, we're going to Washington because we got to stop this vaccine thing. If you don't do that, it's like all bets are off at that point. And then we connected, and it's like, oh my goodness, this was what it was all about. So thank you for insisting. I said, oh, well, we'll find a day and a time. And you're like, what about now? It's like, what about now? So thank you very much, Annie.
Thank you, Ralph. And for people who are interested in learning more about Dr. Cruz, he has a Facebook page too, and he has a lot of cool stuff on there.
We're gonna go hook up with him, and we'll tell him about your interview. We'll give him your interview.
Thank you so much, Annie.
Thank you, Annie.
I look forward to seeing you. So you're going to be here on the East Coast soon.
Washington, D.C., November 14th. Everybody should go to the Washington Mall and you can
check out thevievent.com.
thevievent.com.
Take a trip up that way.
Yeah. All right. Bye, Annie. We'll talk very soon. We'll send you some messages.
Thank you.
Bye now.